Thank you, guys. I hope my voice carries. I coached a 2-hour lacrosse practice this morning before driving here, so if I need to stop and take a sip, my apologies. Today we're talking about motion shifts and formations. These are 3 things that in the last 2-ish years that I was at St. Ignatius, we decided to start really implementing and playing around with, as I actually just had the conversation with a few people. Once you run the offense for a long time and those defensive coordinators see it year after year, they're really able to play those keys. So we found shifts, motions, and formations as a good way to disrupt that rhythm, give some false keys, and be able to give that defense something to think about that's not, hey, it's triple or it's zone dive, right? All those base core plays that they've been used to defending, that they felt like they were comfortable in their rules, on their defenses, in their schemes. So, as Coach mentioned, I run a YouTube channel called Flexbone 101. I was formerly at St. Ignatius. I am no longer there. I'll get to that in a second. So just a little bit of background about me on why, I don't know, I'm here talking to you and maybe it's important. A little bit about my background. I grew up in Rochester, Michigan. Played at a suburban school called Stony Creek. I was the first class all the way through. I think we ran veer, but I played offensive line, so I was more worried about blocking the guy in front of me than what was going on behind me. Sorry, I'm probably just like most of your kids. And also always a good chance to throw up embarrassing photos from the early 2000s, because thank God I don't look like that anymore. After that, I went to the University of Michigan, if the opening slide didn't give that away. Wound up starting my coaching career at Madison West High School in Madison, Wisconsin. That's where I first got my introduction to option football. I won't say we were good at it. I won't say we did everything correctly. But that's when I started watching Georgia Tech games, breaking them down, trying to understand what was going on, and figured, hey, maybe other people would find this useful, and then the YouTube channel started. From there, my wife got, that wasn't supposed to get bigger. My wife got matched at Larry Children's Hospital. I came down to live in the city, was looking at highlight videos of the close by high schools to try to figure out where to coach. I opened up the St. Ignatius highlight video and go, hey, they're running my offense, and it's a mile down the street. So I wound up coaching there for 6 years. In that time, I did what everyone does, moved a little bit north in the city, and then moved to the northern suburbs, which then my 5-minute commute became sometimes a 2-hour commute when that traffic sucked, which, you know, I could live without. So as for this year, I mentioned I am now a free agent, and that is mainly due to the fact that my wife and I are expecting our first child in July. It is a baby girl. Still coming to grips with that. However, my wife was like, you are absolutely not driving an hour and a half into the city and home every day and having a child, so one of those things had to give. I'm sure we'll talk more about that later. So into the crux of what we're talking about today. I'm also a huge tech nerd, so PowerPoint's kind of my thing. I'm sorry. As far as formations, I think it's a good idea. Some people use these terms interchangeably. I think it's really smart to make sure we actually define what we're talking about in each of those areas. So the formation is going to be, what are you coming out in the initial huddle? What are your reads? Who are your eligible receivers? Right? You've got the last man on the line of scrimmage is eligible. Go catch a pass, number permitting. That's important for later. And 4 players in the backfield. Your quarterback and usually your B-back and 2 A-backs if you're running a traditional flex set. Our motions, 1 player can be in motion at the snap of the ball. That motion has to be parallel to the line of scrimmage or backwards. And our shift. In your shift, multiple players can move where they are, who's eligible, who's not eligible, which side of the field. It does require you to be set for a full second before you snap the ball. Now, getting to formations. Why are formations important? Well, or maybe some advantages of using formations, right? It's really easy. You come out 2 X's, 2 A's, and a B. It's a balanced formation. You can run everything out of it. So why would you stray from that? So the first is you can dictate the defensive strength, right? You start throwing in a tight end. You put 2 receivers on the same side. You can play around, and instead of guessing where the defense is going to be, if you know that the D coordinator is always going to put his 3 technique to the strong side, well, if you tell him where the strong side is, you're no longer guessing. So you can make your play call strong side or weak side based on where you know they're going to align that 3 technique or that 1 technique, right? Some D coordinators do it by side, some do strength, some do the player. So that's part of your scouting and figuring out how that strength is going to be called. Next is to gain a numbers advantage. While we're balanced on an offensive formation, so are they. So if you're able to move guys around, whether that's 2 A-backs on the same side, 2 X's on the same side, an X and a tight end, whether you're able to move the B-back out, you can create mismatches. And depending on how the defense adjusts or doesn't adjust, able to, as we used to say, bring another guy to the party. Right, so there are a lot of plays when you've got guys on the backside who maybe are runoffs, maybe they're just in motion, kind of eye candy. Sometimes you can use that eye candy to help you out in the play in your blocking scheme. Creating schematic confusion. There are not a lot of defenses that know how to, say, defend a 4-man surface. They may not know if you've got 2 X's on one side and 2 A's on the other side, how they're going to debate that. And in those 2, 3, 4 seconds that the defense is trying to figure it out, you can snap the ball, and that gives you a huge advantage. Because if they're looking at their coach, if they're looking at each other, they're not looking at the ball, they're not looking at their reads, and that's when big plays happen. And the last one is to break tendencies. So I need to be very careful with my language. Previously at Ignatius, I think we had some very ironclad tendencies, right? Like if you watched our film and you knew the certain situation, you knew exactly what we were going to do. So being able to use formations, well, being able to use any of these really, not only can you break tendencies, but you can give false tendencies and false keys. We'll talk about those more later. So some examples. So the first, this is my absolute favorite. I'm sure this is nothing new for a lot of you, but running over, right? Putting those 2 X's on the same side, put that inside X on the line, and put that defense in conflict. Are they going to apex an outside backer and give you a numbers advantage to that side? Or are they going to roll the corner over and wind up overloading that side and allow you to run to the backside? Pretty simple. But from a formation standpoint, and I have this drawn up, pretend we're running rocket. I feel like that's just, it's a really easy play to run for, well, the purpose I'm gonna make. It is pretty easy to flex that B-back out to the opposite side and force their hand to say, you have to govern that B-back. You cannot roll that corner to the 2X side. So it's something really easy, and God forbid, if they don't cover that B-back, throw them the ball. I know a lot of times when we would run formations, we would have different aspects. We didn't necessarily have that ready, right? We didn't have a call. We didn't have the quarterback understand, like, if no one's out covering the B-back, just throw them the ball. But that is a part of the offense that, hey, even if it gets 3 or 4 yards, that's all you really need, right? To stay on target, on track, on script, assuming your B-back can catch. I guess that's a caveat. For example 2, so if we continue with the rocket example, but we'll stay on our base formation, right? Whether you call it spread, whether you call it base, at Ignatius, we straight up just didn't call it formation. If we didn't call it, that's what we wanted. Again, if we're running rocket, your B-back is usually squirting out the backside. Sometimes you might throw a screen to him, but he's there. And instead of him just being eye candy to the backside, you can actually motion him into the slot. So both of these examples give you an empty look. most defenses only have one check to empty. So if you really want to throw the ball, or that's something that you can test and probe early in a game, to understand how they play over, or to understand how they play empty, now you'll know, all right, these are the passing concepts that might work against that later in the game if we need them. For our next example, being able to cheat your play side receiver in. We called it snug, trim, I've heard. You can play around with that split. But being able to switch that A-back and that X, where your X or your number one receiver is in the slot and your A-back is way outside, guess what? Your best receiver is now being guarded by a safety and an outside linebacker. And that's probably a much better matchup that you like versus probably their number one corner. And God forbid if they try to bring that corner in and bring a safety out, those are the type of miscommunications and assignment switches that we're looking for. As they're trying to communicate that, you can run a quick play, especially if your X can block. You are able to switch those assignments so you can still run your full accompaniment of plays to that side even though you don't have an attached A-back. All right, this is one of my favorite examples. So I was combed through a bunch of Air Force film, a little bit of Harding film, to try to find some good examples, because as much as me drawing stuff up goes, I'm sure seeing it actually run in person sometimes solidifies it a little bit. So the first thing I want to show is that we have a 4-man surface. Now, why that's important? You have your A-back outside. You've got your receiver as the last man on the line of scrimmage. You have your tackle over, and what the defense doesn't realize right away is the end guy on the line of scrimmage is your other receiver. So all of a sudden on that nub side, they're not paying attention to that nub receiver. They're honestly, at this point, they haven't even really overloaded to the 4-man surface, so you could kind of take your pick on where you want to go. But what winds up happening is, shockingly, they throw the ball. And they wind up having the tackle wide open, if this works the way I want it to. There we go. He fakes a block. Just like we saw in the previous outside veer boot, he's wide open, intermediate behind the corner. So they wind up missing that route. Unfortunately, a lot of the examples I wound up using weren't exactly huge plays, but I figure they are good for the sake of conversation, that you can see the idea that just putting that defense in conflict, bringing that receiver instead of split out or snug, lined up at tackle, and forcing the defense to have to realize that is an advantage that you can take. The last, I think is this my last example? Yes. Yeah, no. So, formation-wise, you've got a snug receiver. You've got an outside A-back in the slot. Man, I wish this went faster. There we go. So notice that they have their A in the backfield. One thing we didn't really talk about as far as formations is changes in alignment off of your base formation. If you watch Air Force a lot, that A-back, and sometimes both of their A-backs, will be anywhere from touching the tackle. Sometimes they'll be a yard back. Sometimes they'll be 2 yards back. Sometimes they are damn near even with the B-back in like an old school T formation. That does create tendencies. However, what it allows you to do is able to run, if I remember correctly, we've got mid-triple towards the snug receiver. You're able to run it without motion because he's already in the backfield in the right spot. So just by changing those responsibilities, right, if your X knows how to come down and block and your A can stalk and go to the outside, you're still able to run your full menu of plays to that side, and all you've done is change that look. I will say on moving the A-backs back, there has to be a little gamesmanship. Because if you only cheat your A-backs back, say on mid-triple, on rocket, I can tell you Loyola Academy picks up on that really fast. So your guys have to be smart enough to know, hey, maybe I'm not involved in this play. I'm going to cheat my split back on my own so that I don't give away that, hey, I'm running that way every time I'm cheated back. And if you want to watch the Ignatius playoff film, you'll see what happens if you don't do that. So, where did I go here? So, perfect example. I love when I ramble right to the example I'm going to make. Notice that there's the A-back that is all the way back into the backfield. This is usually the key, mid-triple or rocket away. If you watch the defensive end on this play, right, you can tell, he knows if that A-back is back, my responsibility is to the outside, and you will watch him fly outside and be able to be run underneath. So those are the types of games that you're able to play. Hopefully that's all making sense. I feel like formations are a really easy way. With all of these things, a lot of it comes down to verbiage, what you're actually doing. When we ran our packages with running our A-backs different sides, we used, SAS, saw, was, and wow. So strong A, strong A, weak A, strong, weak A, weak. Is the easiest way we could do it. We could tag our formation so that no matter what we were in, we could send those A-backs to different places. We used Bo and Boz for B out weak, B out strong, so that you're not putting in full new formations. You're not allowing or forcing your kids to learn 5, 6, 7, 10 new formations. You're able to use what you already have and tag it to move them around. Of course, there's games you can play off of that as well. Now, as we get into motions, so some of the reasons we like to run motions is to gain a numbers advantage. Similar to formations, you can bring another guy to the party, you can add an extra blocker, you can add eyes and drag people if you're faking a jet and forcing guys to jump outside. But if the defense doesn't react, if they're not bringing a guy to your motion, you're basically cheating an extra guy over. The second is manipulating defensive assignments. So, if you go hard, right, you're a big mid-triple team, you're a big triple team, rocket, right, they're used to seeing that guy constantly going in motion and knowing the play's going in that direction. You can change that defensive assignment where all of a sudden you're throwing in a twirl motion. All of a sudden he's motioning the opposite way. Being able to fake that jet and put that D-end in conflict. Is he a pitch player or is he a jet player? Same for that outside linebacker. Something I didn't appreciate enough early on was disrupting eye discipline, right? Teams work all week against the triple, right? Here's your key. Here's what you need to be watching, right? As soon as the huddle is broken, you get to the line, hey, if that guy goes in motion, you're doing X. Well, what happens if all of a sudden that guy goes in motion in another direction? Right, what happens? They're sitting there, you know, they pop up, they have to think, they're already playing defense, so we know they're probably not the smartest players on the field, and that gives us an advantage. Sorry if you guys also coach defense. And lastly, giving false keys. So as a way, it's similar to breaking tendencies, right? If they're used to seeing every time a guy goes one direction, you run one direction, being able to give a false key, being able to get guys flying the wrong direction, making guys, coaches put themselves in bad situations based on their calls, their blitzes, their schemes, all very important for success. So I think this is probably the most basic that Ignatius we started playing around with. It could technically be considered a shift, bringing the backside A-back on zone dive across the formation. Now, whether you want to fake a jet and have him continue on and lead to the outside of your attached A-back, that's one way to run it. Or you just literally motion him over inside your play side A-back and you just wedge it straight through the two gaps. That is what Air Force does here, and I find that fairly good success with it. He goes, he gets set, you're running zone dive straight ahead. I guess my subtitle of the presentation, my joke was always we wound up doing all this work to run zone dive. I wound up calling our offense 50 Shades of Zone Dive because we literally just dressed it up as many ways as we could. And we knew as long as we had an attached A-back somewhere, if we got in trouble, they came out with something we didn't know, we audibled, tried and true. One of our quarterbacks just called it bread and butter. That's what we would run. For a second example, similar to the formation. Oh shit, you know what? There was a good example I forgot to put in here. I'm gonna have to talk about that. Defensive backs have to communicate coverage. A lot of defensive coverage is based on, all right, I've got number 1 to number 2, I've got number 2 to number 1, right? I carry number 1 if he goes vertical. So what you can do is if you change who your number 1 and number 2 receivers are by motioning your A-back from one side to the other of that snug receiver, all of a sudden those DBs are turning around and communicating and not looking into the backfield or at their keys or at the ball. It's something really simple. You can actually do it from the backside of zone dive as well. I forget if I actually threw that in here. Okay, so we did not run a lot of basic trips at Ignatius, and by basic trips, I guess traditional Flexbone trips. But out of this look, most people would say it's really hard to run, say, triple right, mid-triple right, rocket right. But using twirl motion with that attached A-back, all of a sudden now you have that full accompaniment of plays. So not only are you giving a false key going away with your motion, but to have him come back, as a play caller, you're able to have your full menu. Your chances are, if you guys see anything like we used to see, that safety might be sprinting with the motion. All of a sudden, that play side safety is now 5-7 yards out of the play and able to take advantage of that as well. So, the motion from the play side A-back. This is the Harding national title game. I don't have the all 22 of this game. Also, I apologize because it is, like most lower level football, not the best camera work. But if you pay attention to play side A, and you can't actually see the safety in the play, but you can see his shadow. And what they're able to do is they're able to run mid-triple without an A-back. And what they'll do is they're gonna run that play side A-back, he's just gonna motion away from the play, and what you'll see is the shadow of this safety is running and screaming so hard in the opposite direction, they cancel him out. They don't even have to block him.
That's pretty good.
Jay in motion. They open the quick read and pitch. One man to beat. First down run up to the 24. Snatching it up ahead.
So, I don't know about you guys. Our receivers and our A-backs, I would not say are our strongest blockers on the team. So to be able to cancel out a defensive back, right, where a guy where you're like, 50-50, maybe we get him blocked, but maybe he takes a good angle, just running him clear the opposite direction is way more effective than trying to block him. Oh, I did talk about this. All right. So when we have our zone dive, right, traditionally we would have our A-back, right, you want it to look like triple, you want it to look like everything else, you want that flow play side. I actually saw my hometown team, the Detroit Lions, started playing around with this a lot, where, no, they're not Flexbone, obviously, but Amon-Ra St. Brown, all of a sudden you would see him take off opposite the play and wind up just running straight down the field after that. So, messes with eye discipline, gives you a false key, and God forbid, if no one goes out and covers him, you can run a two-man route combination on the backside on play action. Right? You can run your post-post, you can run your post-wheel, you can run smash, literally anything. But I think most times you will see that if they're paying attention to that guy running the opposite direction, it's that backside linebacker who might make the touchdown saving tackle on zone dive that is no longer there, because now he's in coverage. So this gets a little bit tied into what we talked about with the formation. Oh, excuse me. A little bit with formation. Notice that you got the A-back in the backfield. I have never seen this, and I think it's worth talking about while we have a whole section on motion. There's a lot of value to no motion. So we are nothing if not dogmatic with, we have our cadence, we have our timing, right? We leave at this time on our motion. Sometimes if you are a big audible team like we were, we would say set, check with the sideline. Defense knows, hey, I don't actually have to be ready until, for another 12 seconds. So to be able to get up to the ball, get under center, run a play without a cadence, without a motion, is another way that, again, messes with scheme, messes with discipline. Especially, you guys might see teams, they like to stem their D-line, right? Bring a linebacker down and they all bump over. They bump their tackles in, they bump their tackles out. If you can go run a play with no motion, all of a sudden you've got a guy who's up on the snap of the ball. He's a lot easier to drive block than he would be if you were down in a 4-point stance. I actually loved this play. I forget which way they run this. Let's take a look if I'm smart enough. Oh, it's a highlight. So the A-back is in the backfield. So they actually run mid-triple. Instead of having any backside, he's actually the front side A-back, takes a half jab step, and because that midline, the midline mesh is so fast, all he has to do is take one step and outside, and now all of a sudden you're running mid-triple, triple everything else with a play side A-back, all because he's cheated back with no motion. Okay, now getting into shifts. Shifts are interesting. And there is, well, I won't get into that too much yet because I'll talk about it later. Shifts are really good for changing formation strength. Being able to move one player, two player, four players, and all of a sudden you were strong on one side, become strong on another side, forcing the defense to figure out, gives you an advantage. Next, being able to disguise an unbalanced formation, right? Just by switching one or two players, able to go from a balance to an unbalanced, and having a defense have to read, react, and adjust before you can run a play becomes very important. And lastly, to reduce reaction time, right? Again, if you're doing this, I will tell you that the play clock is not your friend. To be able to have to call the play, have the players understand, break the huddle, get to the line of scrimmage, get in the original formation, call shift, have everyone shift, get in the right spot for the full second count before that play clock ends. There was early on it might burn a lot of timeouts, you might get a little nervous, you might take a few 5-yard penalties, but it is very imperative that if you do want to incorporate this, getting in and out of the huddle, running to your spots is very important because those 1 or 2 seconds when your right tackle is too lazy to run to the left because he's tired is the difference between a big play and a timeout. So for this example, this was our bread and butter when we had 5-star tight end, Justin Scott, that we used. If we ran him into the boundary and we set our strength into the boundary, we had the defense set their strength into the boundary, and all of a sudden we run him to the other side and get down and run a play, that's huge, because all of a sudden you have an unbalanced formation, numbers to the field, and a lot of times nothing but space once you get to the second level. Teams do start getting smart at this, so we did experiment. We played around with shifting him to the field and then immediately going back into the boundary and just hammering the boundary, right? If we could catch them in both of those, it led to good outcomes for us, because I don't know about you guys, we'll live in the boundary all day. We will run to the boundary 100 plays out of 100. It does not bother us. Sure, we'd like the field, and our A-backs would love running to the field a little bit more, but we knew we were good into the boundary to get our 2, 3, 4 yards every play. Another example, I thought this was funny. I've watched a lot of Air Force film, and I haven't actually seen them do this a whole lot, so I don't know if this was a mistake on their part, or if this was actually called, but they just switched their A-backs. So nothing crazy. If you've got teams that are manned up, if they're straight up putting guys on your A-back, obviously shit pitch. But if you got a dude, one dude at A-back and one less dude at A-back, and you're like, hey, I really want to run this the other direction, you can just shift them over. What you'll notice there is also, I don't know if I'll play this again. The B-back, while they're switching, actually does his own shift about a yard backwards. That is a huge tell for Air Force that chances are they're running zone dive, because he'll take that extra step, because that'll come into play here in a second. So what's going to happen here? We have a tight end to the right. There we go. And we got our other receiver. We got both A's on the same side, and our B-back. And what they wind up doing is they shift. So you've got the A-back in the backfield coming up to be attached. You've got the other A-back coming up onto the line of scrimmage. So you've now went from a 3-man surface to a 4-man surface. And if I recall correctly, the defense does not adjust at all to this shift. So you notice that outside guy actually widens outside the widest guy. There was a 8-foot hole between those two. So by just that shift, getting that extra man surface opened up a whole extra gap worth of space for them to go through. And the last one, I forgot to make this slide, and it was part of the reason I wanted to do this presentation, and that's what I get for waiting till 10 o'clock last night to finish my slides. It's another way to mess with teams if you go over and they don't bring the corner, you can actually use a shift, put your backside A-back on the line, move your inside receiver off the line, and now make him eligible. Because then they have to figure out, oh shit, that receiver that we've just been treating as an extra offensive lineman can all of a sudden now go out deep for a pass. And see them try to freak out. And there is a good chance with a lot of these. One example I wanted to put in here is if you come out in some wild, ridiculous formation or you shift into something, chances are you're going to get that other coach to burn a timeout, right? Because they're going to want to see it, they're going to want to understand it, they're going to want to diagram it and tell their kids, like, hey, we haven't practiced 5 guys on one side. Like, what do we do? And then you can either go right back to it and take advantage of that, or you can save it in your pocket for later in case you need it and run away from it. So there's a lot of me rambling at you. There is a lot of things you can do. There was a lot of potential. but I wanted to make sure that this isn't completely free to install, right? I think it has a time and a place. I think there's a lot of value to it. I think it is very hard to live in for a few reasons. So, the first, I called it opportunity cost because I'm a nerd and like economics. But all the time that you spend figuring out what is your verbiage, how long are you going to practice this, making sure the kids actually understand it. That's a lot of time that is being taken away from some of your bread and butter, right? Like, could we get that much better at outside veer? Could we get that much better at our inside veer? Could we get that much better at literally anything? And figuring out what that value is. Because if the value is, yeah, this is going to help us, and we've got to, well, I'll get to that later, but our kids can pick it up, it's not going to be that expensive to install, great, I highly recommend it. But if it's taking away and you're messing up snaps and messing up reads, it may not be worth it. The second, one thing I didn't touch on is personnel. I'm sure we would all love to have a 6'7", 250 receiver who is able to run deep on the outside and also able to line up at tight end and block at the end. Most of those kids don't exist. So what happens is you wind up having to personnel this, right? If you're shifting and using formations with a tight end and your receiver is 5'10", 140 pounds, is that really giving you that much of an advantage? However, you may personnel it, and all of a sudden you wind up audibling or shifting into another formation, and now you have an offensive tackle lined up at wide receiver because you didn't have a second receiver on the field. So that's happened to us more times than I want to admit. It does give you some blockers. So as a play caller, you have to understand, all right, I have two A-backs on one side. What can I call? What can I not call? Or I'm motioning this guy out of the protection. Where am I weak? I don't have a receiver on the left side. What can I not do? Because your play sheet almost becomes, hey, what can I and can I not run to each side out of these situations? Because you don't want to run triple right, not have a backside A-back, and all of a sudden you have a pitch to no one and turn the ball over. That's also happening. And lastly, it's a fun one to end on. I originally had it as kids are dumb. And last night I decided I wanted to be a little bit more positive. Kids can be dumb, right? This offense takes a lot to run. It takes a lot of reps to understand your dive key, your pitch key, reading your closest safety. Is it a two high defense? Is it a one high defense? All those, is it a 7-man box? Is it an 8-man box? All those things we ask our kids to do. And when you're motioning, you're shifting, you're using formations, all of a sudden they're having to make all these calculations. They're having to figure all this stuff out in like 6 seconds, which at Ignatius, fortunate, for as smart as those kids are on paper, some of them really struggle. And the hardest part that we ran into is, yeah, you rep it with your ones, but your twos, your threes, they may still be figuring out how to run a post route. So if your number one goes down, and all of a sudden you have to throw away everything that you just put in because the kid is too dumb to know whether he's lined up outside or inside. I really don't want that to happen to you guys because it is immensely frustrating, and you realize you can wind up wasting a ton of practice time to get this right. So that's not to scare you away from it. I do think it has value, but for each situation is going to be different on whether you have a team of seniors where you know your install is going to be a breeze and you're looking for new stuff, versus, hey, I know I'm a sophomore heavy team, maybe let's get really good at our base stuff and look at this in a few years. So with that, I'd like to say thank you. Again, I'm Alex Carrick, you can reach me there. Like I said, looking for a job. So if you know of anything, if you've got questions, if you want cut-ups, Honestly, I work in tech during the week. You just want to like hang out on Zoom and talk ball, I'm happy to do that as well. Thanks for having me.